Okay, so Payday 3's second year of post-launch support was dreadful, but actually, year 2 and some of the things that happened during it might have been exactly what the game needed. If I'm going to start a video with a statement as paradoxical as that one, I'd better explain myself, and I will, but first we need to understand what the community's mindset was going into year 2, what we wanted, what we expected, and maybe even what we felt like we were owed. Year 1 had its fair share of issues. Plenty of the content that was on its initial roadmap ended up being delayed, but did eventually release. And when we got our hands on most of that post-launch content, while I still think it was lacking in certain areas like narrative and replayability, for the most part, what we got was pretty decent. Year 1's delays were mostly caused by community backlash to certain decisions made before launch that needed to be addressed before releasing the rest of the bad Apple content. Then, once Boys in Blue released and we started to get more consistent content additions and better communication, the rest of the year was kind of a good time. That's why, going into year 2, we all kind of hoped that we would continue trending upwards update after update, backed by what we had assumed would be a consistent year of communication and additions. We thought the game would be in a very different place at the end of year 2 than it was at the end of year 1. The second year started with some big promises. We received the first World Bank Legacy heist, teasers for the return of Jacket, a fan-favourite character, and above all else, we were told Payday 3's secret would be coming in 2025. So the stage really was set for year 2 to be quite an exciting year. All the while, over in the Starbreeze headquarters, they still hadn't found a full-time CEO, so were under the active management of Mats Yule as interim CEO. He quite infamously said that once Operation Medic Bag had concluded, which in his eyes it had at the end of Q3 2024, the team could then continue to add amounts of value to the game with significantly reduced investment. Further to that, he also had other goals for the company that came before making Payday 3 as good as it can be. His focus was seemingly split amongst Project Baxter, Starbreeze's work for hire collaborations with other studios, and of course, his ambition to have all of Starbreeze working from Stockholm, which would eventually lead to the shutdown of the French division, who were critically important to Payday 3 from a technical perspective. So the start of year 2 was looking good from what we were told as the community, but the signs that it was still going to be a bumpy ride were definitely there. Now I want to talk about year 2 itself and everything that happened within it, starting off with why I think it was such a bad year to be a Payday fan. And then we'll move on to the potential light at the end of the tunnel that means year 2 might have actually been exactly what Payday 3 needed to have a successful future. Firstly, for the negatives, content. Some of the content released during the game's second year was really strong. The first World Bank Legacy heist has its issues, but is at the end of the day a great modernization of a classic heist. And again, more recently with the Delivery Charge DLC, I stand by what I said in my video on Update 16, I think it's the best heist in the game right now. We also had the addition of the Jacket character pack, the Overskills system, and Armor 2.0, so it's not like year 2's content offering was entirely bad, but it definitely has its shortcomings. The Party Powder heist, in my opinion, is one of the worst heists in the game, and the Smash and Grab heists are cool in concept and certainly work as the onboarding heist for newer players, but failed to provide much value to existing players that are all still hungry for more content. The Overskills system was fantastic when it was added, as it gave us something to grind for, and the allure that perk decks in a way might have been back, but over time has become quite a forgettable system. Once you have all of your overkill weapons to the highest level, even though they are objectively better versions than the ones we had before, we're kind of just back at square one now, with 6 slightly better overkill weapons to choose from. As long as the overkill system stays in the game with the same framework that it currently has, a lot of the cooler opportunities Starbreeze have to add certain weapons into the game kind of have to get locked behind that system, or else they'll completely destroy the game's balancing. I'd love to have some more extravagant options for weapons to bring with me on a heist, like maybe an RPG, a flamethrower, or even a railgun if we want to take it that far, but I'd like to use them for more than a couple minutes at a time. So So even though the Overskills system was a good addition for the time being, it's another band-aid solution to a system that needs a complete overhaul, much like the Adaptive Armors edition was a bandage to the armor system that did eventually get a full overhaul, but needed one from the very beginning. Of course, those last 2 points about Armor 2.0 and the Overskills system are highly dependent on how well Skills 2.0 is implemented, and as that's not in the game just yet, we'll need to wait and see how well the three systems synergize. I imagine that the Overskills system, Armor 2.0, and eventually Skills 2.0 have all been designed with each other in mind, and will hopefully synergize a lot better together, because I don't really think they stand too well on their own when looked at in a vacuum. But anyway, I wanted to highlight that not all of the content released in Year 2 was bad, just that there wasn't really enough of it. In between each update there came a slew of silence, and of course, when that silence was broken, at times it left us with tweets that aged immeasurably badly. Communication is actually the second biggest pain point Payday 3's second year faced. This isn't just a lack of communication I'm here to have a little bit of a rant about, but it's also the timing of certain communications, and also what was being communicated itself. The most baffling decision that I have seen the team make has got to be the announcement of the PUBG Work for Hire collaboration immediately after the release of the first World Bank trailer. It ground any momentum that honestly terrific trailer could have sparked up to an absolute halt, and just showed where Starbreeze's priorities lied at the time. It was a punch in the gut of the community, and also I can imagine the developers who spent a lot of time working on remaking one of the series' most iconic heists were pretty disappointed as well. And of course, the people who put together the first World Bank trailer itself, which is still the single best trailer Payday 3 has received so far. Even though I'm a massive fan of the jacket trailer, the first World Bank trailer just edges it out. Of course, that's not where the communication mishaps ended though. We've already touched on the offline mode tweet, so we'll skip over that one and instead jump to the end of Year 2 with the delivery charge DLC. This time, it wasn't actually the timing of the communication that was off, even though you could argue that communicating a release window for a heist before it was actually set in stone, which ended up not being possible, and seeing the update delayed to the next month is a problem with communication timing itself. I actually wanted to focus on the trailers. Not just one of them, but both. Each trailer had a frankly inexcusable mistake in them. I can't even comprehend how Chains' missing arms in the first trailer and the repetition of the vault shot from the second trailer managed to go unnoticed to the point where they made their way out to the community. It just made for a terrible first impression for a heist that is genuinely among the game's best. I'm actually working on a completely separate video about Payday 3's trailers and how the updates are being communicated to us, so if that's something you want to learn more about in the future when that video does come out, all I ask is that you consider subscribing. There are other communication issues that I can touch on throughout the year, and other shortcomings such as the delivery charge heist itself seemingly failing to bring back even the small bump of players that the game usually gets after an update, but there is one last aspect of Payday 3's second year that I wanted to focus on in this video that was rather negative, and that was losing the key members of the team that we did throughout Year 2. We all know that Lil Guy G and Almir Listo stepped away from the company, leaving massive holes in the trailer department and public image of the company respectively, as these were both community figures that were known in the Payday space. Almir had been a huge part of the company for well over a decade, and Lil Guy G was a well-respected community figure turned Starbreeze employee that made some of those amazing trailers we spoke about beforehand. And to be clear, I'm talking about the jacket and the first World Bank trailer. Lil Guy G was not responsible for the 3 shots of the bank vault, nor is he the thief that stole Chains' arms.
Yeah, no, nothing. We're good here. Yeah, no, everything's cool.
But there were also other key people that left Starbreeze as well, such as Marcus, who was behind the live action content we got for Payday 3 throughout the Dragon Files ARG, as well as Joachim, who was responsible for a lot of Payday 3's cooler animations, both in-game with things like weapon inspects and interactions, but also in the trailers as well. So even if you're as positive and hopeful as I am about the game's future, and always try to be, it's without a doubt that Payday 3's second year was rough. For the players that weren't so clued into what was going on, all they saw was a handful of content drops throughout the year that didn't really change too much in the grand scheme of things, and for those of us that pay much more attention to Payday, we saw what looked like the company falling apart at times. So, how on earth am I going to flip this script on its head and explain why I think when people look back on year 2 in the future, this year has the potential to be seen as a crucial one for the potential future success of Payday? It all boils down to two major events that occurred that are also partly the reason why year 2 was such a mess in the first place. To start us off, we had the ending of the partnership agreement between Plaion and Starbreeze. This agreement and its 18 months of post-launch support lines specifically lived rent-free in the heads of most people in the community for the first 18 months of the game's life. We certainly had bigger concerns and prioritized those during the game's first year, but at the start of year 2, most of us were wondering whether Plaion would renew this contract, and more importantly, what would happen if they didn't. Without Plaion's backing, would that just be it for Payday 3? Game over? Would Starbreeze find a new partner for the game's future, and if they did, what problems would that bring? Well, the day that marked the end of those 18 months came and went, and we all watched on with bated breath to hear what the outcome was, and what it was certainly better than I had ever expected. Plaion had chosen not to renew their agreement and instead handed the full publishing rights back to Starbreeze. This meant that supporting Payday 3 into the future became a much more appealing option for the company, as they would be taking home the lion's share of any potential profits the game made. To recap, Starbreeze and Plaion each took 50% of the profits, so Plaion got 50 and so did Starbreeze. Then, on top of giving Plaion 50%, Starbreeze had to give an additional 33% of their 50% to 505. That means when all is said and done, Starbreeze would be taking home just over 33% of any profits made by the Payday franchise, at least until the agreement came to an end. Now, they're making around 66%, so essentially by ending this agreement with Plaion, Starbreeze have doubled the profitability of the Payday franchise for the company, and they only need to pay that additional 33% until the sum of 40 million euros has been paid, which, if they manage to build up Payday 3 into the successful game that it can be, might not take as long as you'd expect. So what ended up causing a lot of silence for Payday 3's second year actually ended up working out for the best, as the company now has a far greater incentive to focus on their main franchise instead of other projects. I strongly believe that even if it led to certain delays for year 2 content, which has undeniably made the last 12 months a difficult time to be a Payday player, this was by far the best outcome from these negotiations. So how exactly did Starbreeze manage to pull this off? Well, that leads us quite nicely onto the second major event this year, and this is the one that I think we'll only come to understand the true significance of in time. You see, just 1 month before an agreement with the old publishers was reached, Starbreeze appointed a new permanent CEO, Adolf Christiansen. While I guess we'll never actually know how involved AK was with the publisher negotiations and the outcome of that situation, I think it's undeniable that with him at the helm, it feels like Starbreeze is headed in the right direction for the first time since the game launched. He's made some significant statements about his intentions with the franchise and its future over the last few weeks alone, and although we haven't seen the impact of him joining the company actually reach the game just yet, I strongly believe that he's planning on delivering on his promises during year 3. Having heard him speak on multiple occasions now, he really seems to understand the position Payday 3 is in at the moment, and because of that, I wouldn't really have expected him to do anything up until this point, and instead, if I was in his shoes, I also would have planned on using the start of a new year as a launchpad for any ambitious ideas for the future. Often, when we discuss Payday 3's potential future changes, it's always through the lens of getting answers in the next few months, not weeks. But this time, that's a little bit different, as year 3 officially begins on September 21st, which is less than 10 days away. If the team don't come out swinging with something like a roadmap right at the very beginning, then I don't really know what to say. AK has made it quite clear that he has plans to share details for the future with us very soon, and I think it's critically important that those promises are kept to. Given how much within the company has changed over the last year, I really can understand why Payday 3's second year was as much of a false start as it turned out to be. But if I'm being completely honest with you, I don't see a world where if year 3 doesn't quite go to plan, we even make it to a year 4. I do genuinely have faith in AK and his philosophy for the franchise, so the ball is now in Starbreeze's court to show us that they mean business at the start of year 3, going on into 2026, and hopefully for many years after. If you have enjoyed this video, a like goes a long way to showing me that, and if you want to hear more about what Starbreeze's new CEO has been saying recently, you can click the video on screen now for a discussion about his recent comments on the future of the game and the franchise as a whole. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.